Welcome, everybody. Wonderful to see you all. David, do you have any housekeeping you want to tell everybody before we get underway?
No, just be sure to stay on mute unless you're speaking. And we're not going to be doing small groups tonight, so life won't be very complicated for you. We can all just kind of lean in, but I believe Matt's going to want us to be very participatory in our participation.
Great, thank you. So we have a wonderful program for you all tonight, as we've been talking about how we as a faith community can be promoting our messaging of compassion and justice and equity and love, and trying to counter some of the other messaging that's out there that is counter to what we value and what we believe. One of the things that we've been talking about is how do we create a public-facing messaging campaign. So one of the ways that we do that is by writing letters to the editor on issues that we care about. And so we're really excited tonight to be able to bring to you an expert in how to write these letters, who also is an expert on how to train people. And so we're very excited, and I'm going to introduce Matt in a minute, but first I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Jerry Folk to open us up with an opening prayer.
Let us begin our time together tonight by reflecting in silence for a few seconds on the common humanity we share with one another and with people of many races, beliefs, cultures, nations, and languages all over our beloved Mother Earth. Let us take a few seconds to reflect on our common calling to do justice, love mercy, practice kindness and compassion, and walk humbly together, always aware of the transcendent reality that we call by different names, and that gives ultimate meaning and purpose to our lives. Let us conclude our prayer with thanksgiving for the Wisconsin Council of Churches and Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, and for all the organizations and people working to create a beloved community that welcomes and embraces all people in truth, justice, reconciliation, and love. And let all the people say, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
So I am delighted to welcome our speaker tonight, Matt Rothschild. Matt is the executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, at least for the next 6 weeks, when he's going to be very excited to be retiring and spend all of his time bird watching. So Matt, as executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, he started there in 2015, and he concentrates his work on raising public awareness of the need to ban partisan gerrymandering, to limit big and dark money in our politics, to protect and expand the freedom to vote, and to oppose the anti-democracy movement in our state and in our country. He is the author of 12 Ways to Save Democracy in America. In Wisconsin, I just happen to have a copy on me. Prior to joining the Democracy Campaign, Matt worked at the Progressive magazine for 32 years, where he was the editor and the publisher. While there, he wrote a book entitled You Have No Rights, Stories of America in the Age of Repression. And he edited an anthology called Democracy in Print, the best of the progressive 1909 to 2009. He's had opinion pieces written and published in the Chicago Tribune, the LA Times, the Miami Herald, and a host of other newspapers. And he's appeared on Nightline, NPR, C-SPAN, and Wisconsin TV, where he does election and night commentary. And as I said, he's an avid bird watcher. Some years ago, I took a training with Matt that is similar to the training he's going to give tonight on how to write a good letter to the editor or op-ed. And I took it because I wanted to see how he did it. And it was a tremendous training. At the end of it, I said, Matt, do you mind? I'm putting together an advocacy workshop. And one of the things I want to do is train people in how to write a good letter to the editor. And I just can't top what you've done. And I hate reinventing the wheel. Can I just steal your stuff? And he was very gracious and said, yes. So when you take my advocacy training, the second session is on how to write a good letter to the editor. And it's completely, I'm just the puppet and Matt is the puppet master. I just do what he did. So we're really fortunate that he had the time to give us tonight to share his expertise with us. So Matt, take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Bonnie, for that nice introduction and for all the work that you do and for all the great work that everyone on this Zoom does for equity and justice and love in the beloved community. I see a lot of friends on the Zoom and it's very comforting to me. It's also comforting to me to be giving this little instructional seminar, because when I was at the Progressive, we used to give these several times a year, how to write an op-ed or how to write a letter to the editor. And I've given a few since being at the Democracy Campaign too, but this kind of brings me full circle. So that's nice too. You know, I'm going to do three things. First, I'm going to talk about how to overcome writer's block, and then I'm going to give a little instruction on op-eds or commentary pieces, and then letters to the editor. And there'll be a little overlap in the last two. And after that, I'm going to ask each of you to take 5 minutes and write the first sentence or two sentences or three sentences of your letter to the editor or of an op-ed that you want to write. And then I'll do some instant on the fly editing, and we'll just go around for as long as time permits, and that'll be that. So I want to start though with some advice to anybody who's doing any kind of writing, how to overcome writer's block. And it doesn't matter whether you're writing a poem, whether you're writing a paper, whether you're writing an article, whether you're writing a thesis, or whether you're writing a sermon. Almost all of us, other than William Shakespeare and John Keats, have anxiety about writing. And that's what writer's block is, an intense anxiety or fear of writing. And it's not so much fear of writing as it is overburdening yourself with psychological expectations that you need to produce something that's great or perfect. And those expectations can be crippling. So my first advice on how to overcome writer's block is simply to go easy on yourself. Writer's block isn't a clinical condition in the DSM-5 manual, but it is a psychological concern, because you're paralyzing yourself with this fear that you're not going to produce something that your high school English teacher would like, or your college professor would like, or your parents, if they were grammarians, would want to see, or whatever. So I just think in writing these things for popular consumption, especially, the important thing is just to get it out the door and to be satisfied with it being good enough. I mean, here the perfect actually is the total enemy of the good, because if you are striving to get something perfect, it's going to take you too long to get something out the door. And by the time you give up and relinquish what you've produced or don't produce anything, the occasion for weighing in on the subject that you wanted to weigh in on has fled. And so you will have missed the opportunity to weigh in. And you all, as Bonnie said, want to find a way to engage in the public debate. And you'll never engage in the public debate if you're trying to write something that's perfect. So we all have anxiety when we write. Recognize the anxiety, name it if you want, but don't let it paralyze you or tackle you. And then the second thing is, sometimes writer's block is a misnomer, and it's actually thinker's block. Not that you don't know how to think, but you don't know what you're going to say. What you're going to say, especially after your main impulse for writing and the main topic that you have for writing something. The reason you want to write an op-ed or a letter to the editor is because something just happened in the news that really aggravates you or angers you or upsets you, or in a contrary way that you want to applaud. So you can figure out what your first sentence is going to be, or maybe the second sentence, but then you don't know what to do from there. And so here, I think you need to go easy on yourself again and just kind of sketch out various arguments you can make. Because in letters to the editor and in op-eds, all you need is 2 or 3 arguments. You are defending your position that you state in the first couple sentences with 2 points, 2 argumentative points. So you want to, you know, kind of, well, I could argue this, I could argue that, and just kind of freely associate how you might defend your position with a couple points. And then when you have like 6 or 7 written down, you might want to group them. Well, these 2 go together and those 2 to go together, and then and those 2 go together. So then you really only have 3 main arguments or 4, and then figure out which are the 2 most or 3 most powerful ones, and take those. And then, you know, the writing, for me, the writing is secondary. The writing is just laying the bricks down. The important thing is what the architecture is. What is your outline? Where are you going? What's your argument? And then you can put the bricks together. And we all know how to talk and how to write, at least in conversational English. And I believe in conversational English in writing op-eds or commentaries. So an easy way to think of this, if you're stuck as to what your arguments are, you know, number 1, it's immoral. Number 2, it's impractical. Number 3, it's gonna cost a lot of money. And those are usually good guideposts to follow if you're lost. So the last 3 points are really crucial, no matter what, well, especially for letters and op-eds. I suppose if you're writing a poem, you don't want to use anger so much. You want to use a different kind of inspiration. But for this kind of journalistic writing, to overcome the anxiety of just getting to the computer, use anger. When you're feeling angry about something you just read in the news or a policy that's just come to your attention, rather than swearing out loud or screaming and yelling or throwing something at the TV or your computer screen, use that anger as fuel to drive yourself to the computer, because getting to the computer and starting is the first huge hurdle. And we all want to avoid it. Anxiety, when we feel anxiety, we avoid our anxiety. That's just human nature. So to overcome that anxiety, use anger to drive you to the computer. And then later, I'll ask you in these other guidelines to take a little bit of the anger out. But it's really important to value anger as a motivating fuel. And then this 4th point is absolutely crucial, because there is a almost irresistible impulse, a centrifugal force, a huge magnetic pull to reward yourself after you've just written 1 sentence. After you wrote that first sentence, you're so proud of yourself that you got to the computer and you wrote your first sentence that you tell yourself you deserve a reward. And so you leap up from your chair and you go do something else. You check your email, or you go do the dishes, you unload the dishes, you go for a walk, you get a snack, you make a cup of coffee, whatever it is, you get up from the chair. And don't kid yourself that you're trying to reward yourself or that you deserve a reward because you did the first sentence. So it's good that you got to the computer and wrote your first sentence, don't get me wrong. But if you get up from your chair, every time you write 1 sentence, it's going to take you way too long to write this letter to the editor or this op-ed. And you need to sit at that computer, recognize that magnetic pull to get up from your chair and resist it. And then just keep going. You need to write all the way through. None of these things that we're going to talk about writing today take too long. A letter to the editor, usually 100 words. An op-ed these days, 400 words or 350 words. That's just, 10 paragraphs, 9 paragraphs. So just plow through. You've got to not get up after the first sentence, no matter what you're writing. Whether that's that sermon or whether it's that poem or whatever it is, don't get up. And then in the modern age, here's another crucial thing. Do not Google. Do not Google while you're writing your first draft. Recognize that Google is just short for procrastination. If you Google in the middle of writing something, you are going to go on a very long detour, because you are going to tell yourself, maybe with some accuracy, that, oh God, I got to check this quote, or I've got to check this fact, I've got to check this date. I can't have the wrong quote or the wrong date or the wrong fact in my letter to the editor or my op-ed. And so you stop your writing and you Google And initially you were doing what you told yourself you were going to do. You check the date, you check the quote, you check the fact, but then you go Google around and see other things. Well, this is related to my subject. I better read that. And then you'll go on another detour and read another thing that's tangentially related. And 45 minutes later, you're still Googling around, or you've gone from Google to Facebook, or you've gone from Google to Facebook to checking your emails. And so you're wasting your time and you're fooling yourself and you're making this project a lot more difficult than it needs to be. So just write straight through. If you need to check a fact, if you are insecure about the fact or the quote or the date or whatever, just put in brackets while you're typing, check this fact, or put it in caps, go back and check this fact, or whatever it is. But keep writing all the way to the end, because otherwise, again, it's just going to take you way too long. So these are my 5 little handy tips for overcoming writer's block, and I hope they will help you. I suppose when all is said and done, the only thing you're going to remember from today, maybe that Google is short for procrastination, and I have it again in one of these other tip sheets. But I do think the most important thing here is use anger to get you the computer. Don't get up after that first sentence. Keep writing all the way through, and don't Google and check facts and stuff while you're in the process of writing. Write the whole thing straight through. It shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes, really. For a 400-word op-ed, maybe it'll take you 30 minutes. For a letter to the editor, it might just take you 15 minutes. So then I've got tips for writing effective op-eds. I used to just say that your first sentence has to be 15 words or less, and just give us the subject and the attitude of your topic. But I've become convinced of 2 things that I've been taught by folks in the race class narrative. So I've changed this over time. And the first is that the first sentence should be in the race class narrative where you seize the moral high ground, where you say something like, no matter your background, your zip code, your race, your religion, most Americans or most Wisconsinites share a belief in X, and X is going to be a moral value that you have. Equity, equality, freedom, decency, kindness. So I believe I've been convinced over time that that is the right way to go. And then the second sentence is something like, but a handful of politicians want to violate this value. And then you get to your topic. For instance, in the budget proposal, they want to eliminate the right to have advisory referendums. And then you'd say why that's wrong. So that's kind of a little slower way to get into the op-ed, but I think it's a better way. And then whether you're writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor, you need to have your points clarified. You need to make 2 or 3 points, and by all means, enumerate them. I think there is some sense with educated adults that if you're enumerating them, you're looking stupid or you're looking childish. And I think that's totally wrong. Number one, you are making sure to the reader and to the editor who's got to decide whether to publish a thing or not, that you've clarified your own views. And to the reader, it's much more much easier to grab a hold of an op-ed, the argument of an op-ed or the argument of a letter to the editor if you got first, second, and third. And it's fine to start the paragraphs first. There are 3 reasons why the ban on referendums, advisory referendums, is appalling. First, second, and third. You'd start the next sentence with the word first, the subsequent sentence with the word second, and the third subsequent paragraph with the word third. And then you're essentially done, except for ending on a high note again on American values or Wisconsin values that echoes the opening. But here are a couple other things that should give you relief. And one is, it is perfectly okay to start a sentence to even start a paragraph with the words and or but. You will not be struck down by lightning. Swear to God, you won't. Your English teacher will not rise from her coffin or his coffin and scold you. Your parents won't send you to your room without supper if you start a sentence with and or but. These are the two easiest ways to link up thoughts from the paragraph above to the paragraph below. I know when I was in college, we were taught you've got to essentially regurgitate the main point in the preceding paragraph to start your next paragraph. And I thought that was the worst advice of all time. And in journalism, it is just totally verboten because you've got a limited amount of space in this letter to the editor. You don't want to waste words or time, yours or the editors or the reader. So just, start the sentence with and, start the sentence with but, and it can be a one sentence paragraph. In journalism, our paragraphs are real short. So no paragraph really should have more than 2 or 3 sentences. A lot of the paragraphs should just be one sentence long. And so that should be liberating for you. I hope it is. Then just standard writing advice that you'll get from any writing instructor. Don't use passives. The bill was passed by Senator Joe Blow. Actually, Senator Joe Blow passed the bill. I mean, you want to put the actor in front, both because active verbs drive the language and also because politically, you don't want to hide the person who is doing the dangerous thing. You don't want to say that, 3 people were shot in wherever and not say who shot them if you know who shot them. And so it's important to use the active voice. Michael Gableman was hired by Robin Voss. Robin Voss hired Michael Gableman. It's just a better way of saying it. Or especially Michael Gableman was hired by, by a Republican official. Well, which Republican official hired Michael Gableman? Let's say it out loud and let people know up front. Acronyms. I don't like any acronym that isn't readily grabbable by the average reader. So FBI and CIA is okay, but I wouldn't do WDC for Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, for instance. Even if I mention Wisconsin Democracy Campaign in paragraph 2, I'm not going to go Wisconsin Democracy Campaign parentheses WDC and then refer to WDC further on, because people are going to see that if they're just scanning it, they're going to see that it's something that they don't understand or comprehend, and they're going to run away from it. And so you don't want to give people a reason to say, holy crap, I don't know what this thing's about. I'm not even going to try to deal with it. So do avoid acronyms and also avoid jargon. We all have jargon. Progressives have jargon, lawyers have jargon, professors have jargon. I'm sure leaders in the faith community have jargon. You need to recognize your own jargon and try not to speak in jargon or shorthand, because you want to speak at a level that everyone can understand. And on a high note about American values, I mentioned that. Here's something that I always try to do. Read whatever you've written out loud to yourself before you send it in. And this is a quirk of the human brain. That is that your ears can hear things that your eyes can't see, especially if it's your own work. And so you'll be reading your draft of your op-ed or your letter to the editor, or your sermon for that matter. And you will stumble while you're reading it. It's not because you don't know how to read. We all know how to read, but you're stumbling because there's something in that sentence that is tripping you up. And so you need to circle that and figure out what it was. And it may be that you just heard the repetition of a phrase or an image you used above. It may be that you've written 2 words in a row, that they're the same word. It may be that you skipped a word. And so, sometimes spell check gets these things. Sometimes spell check doesn't get these things. And so when you read things out loud, you will catch things that you didn't catch when you were just writing it and when you were just reading it to yourself, not aloud, silently, reading off the screen or reading off a piece of paper silently. You won't hear it. And your hearing is better than your vision, oddly. I mean, every week for the past 2 years, I've been doing two-minute commentaries or minute and a half commentaries for WUWM. Anyway, some radio station here in Madison. And I invariably rehearse it 2 or 3 times, because each time I read it out loud, I stumble on it. And these are just one-pagers. So it's really important to read things out loud. In fact, I saw in the New York Times, and on page 2, sometimes there's an editor's note. This was a couple months ago. Reporters were reading their stories to themselves out loud. Many of them had that same practice. And for the same reason, you'll catch stuff. So, and the last thing is, if you want to do an op-ed, maximize the chance that your op-ed is going to run, and perhaps for letters to the editor as well, you should look at anniversaries or holidays. And you can always just Google holidays in May, or holidays in June, or anniversaries in May, anniversaries in June. And you'll get different lists from different places, but there may be something that that really relates to your area of work. I mean, Bonnie and I are in the Wisconsin Voting Rights Coalition. So I do this every month. We have a communications subcommittee that meets every week. And I'm always trying to look at dates that might be helpful. And for instance, you all know about the 1849 anti-abortion law here. Well, I looked it up just on a lark to see what date the thing was actually passed, and it was passed in March. This was in February. And so I said to the folks in the communications group, look, here's the actual anniversary. It was passed in the Assembly in early March, passed in the Senate in mid-March, signed by the governor in 1849 in late March. And all 3 of those dates were possible dates for people to write op-eds or commentaries or just postings online. Hey, this is the date back in 1849 when they just barely passed this sucker in the Wisconsin Assembly by 1 vote or 2 votes, whatever it was. And so that's actually very helpful. And for some editors, it's actually kind of catnip. They love these anniversaries. They see them as occasions to write. But for instance, Memorial Day is coming up. July 4th is coming up. Those are good occasions. International Human Rights Day in December is always a good one. There are a lot of dates that you can use. And so I would just mark them in a calendar, go through a year-long calendar at some point, or at least month to month, and then tell yourself you're going to write an op-ed on this 10 days before the actual anniversary. And after you've written the op-ed or the letter to the editor, 1 week beforehand, send it to the editor. Because, if it's International Human Rights Day or Memorial Day, they're looking for a piece on Memorial Day. But once they found that piece, they're not, and have accepted one, they're not going to look at the next 10 that are coming in, because they're going to say, I solved this problem. We've got our piece on Memorial Day. And so try to get it in there a week ahead of time. And same with letters to the editor on these anniversary dates. I think that'll work. So letters to the editor. There'd be a little overlap here. Here again, the important thing is keeping it short. You can see the guidelines at each newspaper that you want to submit a letter to the editor. Google the newspaper and letter to the editor policy. And usually they will tell you what their policy is. Sometimes they want you to cut and paste your letter to the editor right in there. Sometimes they'll give you the email to send it in. Big papers like the New York Times have letters to the editor. But in this day and age of cutbacks in journalism, most local papers like the Cap Times or the State Journal don't have one designated letter to the editor always. So, but go to their website, whatever the website is that you want to submit to, and follow their instructions. But most of the time, they're going to tell you that the letter to the editor needs to be 200 words. And sometimes I think 100 words is best. Best not in that you can have the best letter of all time, but best in your ability to maximize the chances that they're going to publish it. That's what we're after, right? So for letters to the editor, you're not going to have time for or space for 3 points like you do in op-eds. You know, here's 3 reasons why the ban on referendums is a bad idea. Here are 2 reasons why the ban on the referendum is a bad idea. Number 1 and number 2. And so I would just do that. And here, I don't know if you have time. I don't think you have time to do the race class narrative at the beginning. You can do it at the end. But I would just say, I would just start your letter by saying, you know, dear editor, the budget bill has a terrible provision in it. It would ban advisory referendums. It's terrible for the following 2 reasons. First, and that's your paragraph, and second, that's your next paragraph. And then you would end with something like, you know, no matter your background, your zip code, your race, your religion, most Wisconsinites value free speech and respect the freedom to assemble and petition our government for redress of grievances. This provision would violate all those esteemed principles that we have enshrined in our Wisconsin Constitution. Please contact your legislator and tell your legislator to vote against it. That's that letter to the editor. So again, small words, short paragraphs. Small words. I was doing this clinic back at the Progressive. We had an environmentalist in from Montana. It was a smart guy. And I gave this use small words thing. And then afterwards, we would force people to write an op-ed on the spot, and for like a half hour or some 20 minutes. And I guess writing instructors are going to have to do this in person. In classes, people are going to have to write on the spot. Otherwise, they'll use the chat bot to write their op-eds with. So I am all for having people write on the spot. But anyway, so he comes back after I gave this instruction about small words are better than big words. And he said, this is George W. Bush's presidency, I think. Bush's policy on the environment is deleterious. So I said, what's the difference between deleterious and bad? And aren't you cutting it pretty thin there, that distinction? Why not use the word bad? It's just as good a word as deleterious as far as meaning goes, and it's going to be much more comprehensible to the largest number of people possible. I mean, deleterious, again, you're using big words, you're scaring people away. This I violated about 6 months ago when I wrote something. I can't remember the fancy word I used. And Mike Crude over at Devil's Advocates on Civic Media was reading my article out loud, and he couldn't pronounce the word. And I felt like an idiot that I threw a word in there that was not only going to make Crudy trip, it was going to make a lot of people reading it trip and run away. So you don't want to do that. Bad is better than deleterious. So use the short words. Again, don't use passive tense, acronyms, or jargon. Here's something. Another reason to read things out loud is to take the anger out. So I said, use anger to drive yourself to the computer when you're writing these op-eds or these letters. When you're done writing and you're reading it out loud, you may hear that your volume is too high, that you're shrieking. My old editor, Winnow, used to say, you're shrieking. And it's just, you don't want to use screaming words most of the time. You certainly never want to use all caps. You don't want to use 3 exclamation points. You want to keep the tone measured, almost no matter how angry you are, or how, and leaving aside your own personal feelings, no matter how egregious the policy is, no matter how bad the policy is, you want to you don't want to convince people by the volume of your rhetoric, but by 1, the logic of your argument, and more importantly, 2, the positive values that you are resonating with your audience. So you don't want to scream. You want to persuade by using facts and good arguments and appealing to people at their highest shared moral values. So let the anger drive you to the computer, take the heat out when you're done by reading it out loud. Again, don't get up after you're reading your first sentence. We did all that. And here for letters to the editor, you should try to write these within the first 24 hours of the news that aggravates you, or the thing that occurred that's got you outraged, the Texas shooting, for instance, whatever it is, or that you want to applaud, like the verdict in the E. Jean Carroll case, for instance. The reason for doing that is the news cycle is so fast that if you take more than 24 or max 48 hours to get your letter to the editor in, they've already gotten letters to the editor in on the subject that you wanted to weigh in on. And there are like 50 other topics that people are writing letters to the editor on. And by the time you get to them, if it's 72 hours or a week later, your odds of getting it published diminish exponentially. So really, in letters to the editor, it's important to strike quickly. So, you know, if I was writing today, I saw something at the Wisconsin Examiner, for instance, on the outrageous decision in Wauwatosa at a trial there that said it was okay for police in Wauwatosa to have a list of targets of protesters who were on a target list, including journalists and protesters who'd never committed a crime in their lives were on a target list by the police department, and they got away with it. So I would want to write something today or no later than the end of the day tomorrow saying this decision by the judge in Wauwatosa giving the police department a free pass to target nonviolent protesters and journalists is an assault on our freedom of speech and assembly that's protected both by the First Amendment of the US Constitution and by the Wisconsin Constitution, or something like that. But we want to do it in a hurry. That's the most important thing. So that's all I've got to offer you as far as instruction from me, just blabbing on and on here. But I do want you to now it's your turn. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to write the first couple sentences, either of an op-ed or if it's a letter to the editor. If it's a letter to the editor, I'm going to go old-fashioned on this. I just want 15 words if it's a letter to the editor. You name the policy that you want to write about and your attitude toward that policy, whether it's the Wauwatosa police decision, whether it's the referendums, whether it's other horrible parts about the budget that say you've got to keep arresting the same number of people as you've always arrested, or we're going to starve you of money, whatever it is. And just give me a first sentence or first 2 sentences, either of a letter to the editor, or if it's an op-ed, I would recommend starting with the race class narrative, but get to the main thrust of the piece, which is a policy that you don't like, and yeah, just spell it out like that. So it is 7:10. I'm going to drink my Gatorade, and I will get back to you at 7:15. And then
while
I'm going to have
people
I'm going to have brave people raise their hands and read their first couple sentences out loud, and I will edit them on the fly.
And while people are working, I'm going to.
So I want to hear from people. There were a couple things in the chat. Let me just get back to Connie real quick. This was a piece on Mother's Day when I thought this was excellent. But one tip I would give is when you're writing on a holiday or an anniversary, I would make that clear at the top. You know, it's Mother's Day. Imagine being a mother who faces this agonizing decision, and go from there. So I think that's another way to go. So yeah, reference the anniversary of the holiday right at the top. Does anyone want to read theirs out loud to me so that I can hear it and give you some feedback?
I have one.
Go
I
ahead.
would- Okay. Angela Hicks. And do I need to say the topic before the sentence or no?
No, just go.
How can we ever progress if we continue to have police targeting the voices of protesters?
I like that, Angela. There's, you'll get two different opinions from writing coaches on whether to start a sentence with a rhetorical question or a question mark. And the older I get, the more permissive I get on this. The old editors would instruct you not to start a sentence with a piece with a rhetorical question, but I don't mind it actually, and so I think that was fine.
Okay, thank you.
Because you got your subject in there, and your attitude toward it is obvious, and that's what you want.
Yeah, I was angry.
Yeah, no, that's good, but you weren't screaming.
That's right.
Cindy Carter has her hand up.
Yeah.
Cindy, do you want to unmute?
Yep. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
I'm not too sure exactly of my figures, but I'll be close, I think. Anyway, the GOP is ready to cut $2 million from the Milwaukee police and fire budgets. This is just another of the GOP's assaults on the city of Milwaukee. The city is short-staffed in its policing efforts the way it is now, and cutting the police and fire budget is appalling. We as residents should be given a good explanation for this, as it is going to affect our city greatly.
Yeah, I think that's great. I might change the first one rather than saying that GOP is ready to cut police and fire, just to get your attitude in there more quickly. I would just say the GOP should not be cutting, police and fire, the budget for police and fire. Words like should and should not are real good words to use in that opening sentence.
Carrie?
Okay, thanks.
This one's more general, but I started, how many more innocent children need to die before we ban assault weapons? Americans overwhelmingly agree that there is no place for these weapons in our society. Our legislators are beholden to the gun industry. We must stop electing anyone until they promise to vote to change the gun laws and take assault weapons out of our society.
Yeah, I think that's great. Again, it started with a question, but that doesn't bother me anymore. There may be some old editors who are just going to say, it starts with a question, we're not going to run it. So that's just a caution. But, I love the we must. Must, again, is another great verb for op-ed writing and letters to the editor. It's a very strong verb.
I've got one as well. Tammy Hayward. It is horrifying that in this so-called civilized nation, we cannot agree to ban assault weapons.
Yeah, I think that's excellent too. Well, your attitude is loud and clear. The subject matter is loud and clear. That's fine. That's all you need to do.
Thank you.
All I got was one sentence. The 1894 abortion bill needs to be repealed. I don't know the year.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's as far as I got.
That's great. And you could just put a bracket, check your date when you're done writing the whole thing. So I'm glad you didn't Google it. But it's the 1849 abortion bill needs to be dropped or whatever you said. And that's fine. Needs to be dropped is a bit of a passive. So you might want to say,
Should?
yeah, we've got to, or yeah, the Attorney General a lawsuit against the 1849 abortion bill should prevail or something like that. But I liked what you had. I thought it was excellent.
What a question. Is it okay to start a sentence with I?
Well, it's a letter to the editor, so it's okay, but You know, Sherry Reams had a sentence in the chat said, I can't understand why the Wisconsin legislature keeps refusing to expand Medicaid. And I told her basically that I'd get rid of the I there and just go, the Wisconsin legislature should stop refusing to expand Medicaid, because you're using your voice anyway, so you don't really need the I in there. So it's okay to use the first person pronoun, but if you're just doing I believe that or I think that, you might as well just skip that and just go to what you think or what you believe, and just state it as an affirmative thesis, like the legislature should stop refusing to expand Medicaid. On the other hand, the one time where I think the I is preferable is if you've had a personal experience. For instance, the father had a personal experience with a daughter who was at Allen, Texas shooting. I definitely use the first person in that one.
Penny Robinson has her hand up.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. I started this out with "we all know" to create a sense of, yes, this is something we can agree on. So we all know that some families have difficulties providing regular nutritious meals. It is just wrong that House Republicans passed a budget that severely cuts Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or SNAP benefits for our families most at risk. So is that first sentence okay, or is it a waste of words?
Well, it's not a waste. I would use something like that first sentence if I was doing an op-ed, and would use the race class narrative there at the beginning. Instead of "we all know," I would say that Wisconsinites, no matter your religion, your race, your zip code, your background, or a majority of Wisconsinites, no matter your zip code, race, background, religion, understand that everyone should have decent meals or nutritious food, or enough money to pay for nutritious meals, or something along those lines. And that's what you're trying to do with "we all know." And the race class narrative is spelling out the "we" to be as inclusive as possible, and also naming racism or alluding to race in a way that will get us all feeling inclusive, and as a way to immunize against racism. So I prefer the race class narrative there, if you're going to do the "we all know" beginning, which is okay. In a letter to the editor, I think it takes too long. I would use it at the end, something like "Wisconsinites, no matter the zip code, religion, race, background, want to have healthy kids and nutritious meals for our kids. We've got to make sure that the legislature responds to that urgent need," or something like that. And urgent, by the way, is a good word in letters to the editor and op-eds.
Kermit.
Thanks. Hi, Kermit Hovey here. This, I think, is maybe more of an opening for an op-ed, possibly. All Wisconsinites want to live in a world of clean air, pure water, and livable weather, and they want to give that to their children and grandchildren as well. Unfortunately, the Department of Natural Resources has failed to keep a Canadian pipeline company from putting all of that at risk.
Yeah, I like it. I like the "unfortunately" as a link. Again, for all Wisconsinites, again, I would use the race class narrative, saying, most Wisconsinites, no matter your zip code, race, religion, background, want to be able to, breathe clean air and drink clean water, and make sure that our children have that freedom as well. And freedom is a good word to use here. I think we need to use the word freedom ourselves, and not just give away the word freedom to the right wing. We've got to recapture the word freedom. And so I would use it there, and have our children have the freedom to have clean air and clean water too. And then unfortunately, and then you get to the bad guys, and you got to mention the bad guys. And you did that well.
I want to give it a go.
Sure.
And just to let you know, I normally write what you call an op-ed, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, on Facebook. And I started off like just my thoughts. And it's a question. Could the city housing authority leadership live in the unsafe housing complexes that they are responsible for?
Well, it's a provocative first sentence. It is starting with a question. So remember that that's going to put some editors ill at ease. But the subject there is clear and your attitude is obvious toward it. So that's good. Another way to do it would be, the city housing authority needs to clean up its act. Then you could say, no one on the authority would want to live in the houses that they are supposed to be supervising or something like that, if you didn't want to use it in the question form.
Okay. Thank you.
So Gwen asked in the chat, what is an op-ed? An op-ed is an old, maybe now antiquated phrase, meaning opposite the editorial. So in a newspaper, in the old-fashioned newspaper, or even today in the New York Times or the Washington Post, you'd open up the newspaper. On the left, at the back of the first section, on the left side, and the third to last page, the last open spread, on the left side is the editorial by the editors of the Washington Post or the New York Times. And then on the adjacent page on the right is, on the opposite the editorial, there is what used to be called the commentary page for either syndicated columnists, like Thomas Friedman, for instance, or Charles Blue, and they'd have room for guest columns. And so it's opposite the editorial. Now, a lot of papers, including the New York Times, have dropped the word op-ed and just either have it a opinion page or commentary page if they have it. The Journal Sentinel, disgracefully, has dropped its op-ed page by and large. You can occasionally get one in there, but I still use the old phrase op-ed. It means the same thing as commentary. So Michelle asks about, are these guidelines for writing testimony for a hearing or a press conference? Well, a lot of the overcoming a writer's block things can be used for that. Certainly having, using small words in short paragraphs, excellent for writing testimony. And I just wrote testimony for the hearing last week in the Assembly on AB 245 on the advisory referendums. I had a lot of one-sentence paragraphs. So I do think that this advice is good advice for writing testimony. You don't want to have long paragraphs in your testimony. First of all, it's harder to read for yourself when you're giving testimony orally. And if it's just written testimony, it's harder for the legislators to read if it's a big, fat, chunky paragraph. So I would use short paragraphs there too.
Yeah, plus if you're speaking, Matt, you usually only get about 2 minutes anyway, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to keep it short, make your arguments clear, 1, 2, and 3, first, second, third, whatever it is. And I think that's a way to go. A question, can you speak to the balance between facts and emotion? Well, we convince people on 2 levels. As I mentioned before, we convince them on our skill at arguing or presenting facts in a logical fashion that defend our main thesis statement at the top, but also, and more importantly, by using moral values that resonate with our audience or resonate with the vast majority of Americans, or vast majority of Wisconsinites. And the famous, what I think should be a famous line from Lisa Lucas of All In Wisconsin, who's a messaging genius. Lisa Lucas says, don't bring a fact to a values fight, which means you're not going to win. It's like, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You're not going to win the argument just with facts. you're more likely to win an argument with values. So it's really important to get on that moral high ground.
Sonia Yelkin has had a hand up for a while.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm still working on it, but mine is more overall. I have well, I'll just read it and get through it as best I can. Democracy is our common shared core value, yet we are now witness to constant anti-democratic actions by too many that are a grave threat to our citizens. The evidence is growing. At first, a candidate stated that an election was to be called into question if he did not win. Another big, I'm trying to decide red flag or something, was the embracing of dictators or autocrats. I'm not sure what word to use there because of what you were saying about keep it simple or small words, and rejection, and at the same time, a rejection of our allies. Now, at Trump's resort, a gathering of Republicans is about to take place with the major white supremacist as the speaker. And I wanted to add a fourth one, but I'm not sure how to put it exactly, but the whole embrace of like Viktor Orban and that CPAC is now traveling so that they can embrace dictators. And then at the end, I was going to say something like this attitude is growing, a dishonor to our veterans and us all. We must stop the threats to our freedoms by rejecting those who show these anti-democratic values.
Yeah, I like that. I think you might have a little too much in there. I wouldn't go to
That's
Viktor
my big
Orban
problem.
of Hungary, certainly. And I wouldn't be coy about using Donald Trump's name at the beginning when you said a candidate questioned, the results of the election. You might as well say Donald Trump did. And at the beginning, again, especially if this is an op-ed, I would use the race class narrative. You're getting close to it. Democracy is our common value. But I would spell it out in the way that they instruct us by saying, no matter our race, religion, our background, our zip code, Americans value democracy, or most Americans value democracy. And then say, unfortunately, Donald Trump doesn't value our democracy. And then go boom, 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 why he doesn't. He wanted to overthrow the government in a coup. He's having Nazis speak down at Mar-a-Lago, and one more thing. But not Viktor Orban, because that's too much of a tangent, I think.
Well, yeah, I was questioning that. I hadn't written that because of that. But that is one of the things, like you were saying, it's so easy to just I could write volumes. And to keep it short is my big challenge.
Yeah, I do think it's just part of it's just a skill, or it's just a discipline you learn over time, just when to stop. For instance, when I'm doing these radio commentaries, they're supposed to be a minute long. They're called democracy minutes, but they're actually about 1 minute and 26 seconds. But I don't want to go longer than that. And it's too long for radio anyway if you go to 2 minutes. So whatever you got to say, we've got to say it in the format and in the length that is going to make it most likely that we're going to get heard or published.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask you, I've done things that either bring Trump or whoever up at the front, and then I've done them to draw the reader in so it's not as obvious, so they'll read the whole thing. Because I have found in texting with some of my old high school friends that are very Trumpian, that sometimes I need to draw them in for them to listen. So, but you're thinking it's better to just state it up front.
Yeah, I would say it up front. I do think you're raising a critical question, though, which is how do we talk to people who we know, who are in our wide social circle, probably not our narrow social circle, who didn't vote the way we wanted to, or are tempted by the anti-democracy movement or the right-wing propaganda that they ingest from Fox News and other sources. And one thing I would caution against is using categorical terms like all Republicans, everyone who voted for Trump are bad. We don't want to dismiss everybody. We want to convince a fraction of those people,
Right.
ideally a big fraction,
To
that
come across.
to come across, yeah, to move away from the abyss. And so I get annoyed, for instance, when I'm listening to the devil's advocate sometimes when they say, well, of course he's lying, he's a Republican. I heard that today or something like that. I mean, I love the guys who do the show, but God, you know, if I'm trying to convince a Republican friend of mine, and I have Republican friends of mine, you know, to come around, I've just insulted them. And no one comes around when you're being insulted. You're just pushing them further into their own camp.
So in the interest of time, there's two things in the chat that I want to lift up and before we close out this portion of tonight. Ahmed Qureshi from the Interfaith Conference asked basically, Ahmed, if you don't mind if I summarize, since so many people are moving to reading their newspapers online, are fewer and fewer people reading the letters to the editors, or maybe a different venue where we should be looking to publish or post our messages?
Well, I still think letters to the editor are that the letters to the editor spot is still a really good spot. I know readership in journalism is down, but it's hard to find another place where people, you know, across political viewpoints actually are reading the same thing. And that's a crisis we have for our public discourse, that we're just in our separate camps, reading separate things, consuming separate cable channels, you know, same in a different algorithm on Facebook than each other, all in our camps. But I think the newspaper still allows for a discussion where there are a lot of people looking at them. I also think your local weekly papers, your shoppers, if they have space for such things as letters to the editor, that's good. Your hyper local paper, like I'm living in the town of Oregon, there's an Oregon newspaper, you know, that's a place to go. The more local, the better sometimes. But I still think it's useful to be weighing in on these letters to the editor pages.
So our last question that I'm going to ask, because it's near and dear to my heart, Bianca Tomasini asked, do editors dislike references to religion or writing as a person of faith in a letter to the editor or op-ed? And I start all my letters that way.
Yeah, I think just the opposite. I think they're more likely to give you respect, and that'll increase your chances of getting it published if you identify yourself either in your bio line or in the first paragraph or somewhere in your piece as a person of faith. I think that is a wise thing to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt, so much. This has been fabulous. As you can tell from all the folks who jumped in and all the people who wrote in the chat, there's a huge amount of interest in this. And people are really looking for this kind of training and assistance. And as usual, you did a fabulous job, and we really appreciate your taking the time. Matt's retirement party is tomorrow. Everybody send him good wishes. He's got just a few more weeks on the job. And I'm going to miss him tremendously, because not only is he a good friend, but he's also a tremendous source of wisdom and experience and expertise. And he's been a fabulous leader in the Wisconsin Voting Rights Coalition. We're all going to miss you a lot.
Well, that's really sweet of you to say. I'm getting nice comments in the chat too. I do want to make an offer. I put my email in the chat. It's rothschild@wisdc.org. In the remaining 6 weeks that I'm on the job, if you are writing an op-ed or a letter to the editor and you want me just to give a quick edit of it, I am more than happy to do that. So shoot me your rough drafts, and don't linger over them and try to make them perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt.
All right. My pleasure. Take care now.
So I'm going to turn it over to Peter Bakken for our call to action.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Matt, for that great presentation. I think the call to action will not be a hard sell this time. It's simply write to your local newspaper, write an op-ed, write a letter to the editor on something that bothers you or that you really want to celebrate and lift up. As we were planning this, we were also thinking, you know, these could be good tips for writing an article for your congregational publication or website or e-newsletter, something like that. these are very widely applicable rules that Matt has given us, and cues and so on. But as he says, just sit down, write, don't get up until you've at least got a draft, and get it out the door as fast as possible. We really need to bend the narrative in this, in Wisconsin, in this culture, in this society, in the direction of greater equity, greater respect, greater compassion for people. And this is one way to do it. And so get out there and write.
Thank you, Peter. So I have just kind of a commercial announcement. We are looking toward our 3rd annual Teach the Truth Wisconsin. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what that is, the 2nd week of October, so this year it's October 8th to 14th, we have declared Teach the Truth Wisconsin Week. You can, if you Google Teach the Truth Wisconsin, you will find events and videos from the last 2 years. What we're basically asking folks to do is, if our state legislature is going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for our schools and our teachers to teach the truth about our racial history, then it's upon us, people of faith, our congregations, our clergy, to step up and to fill in that gap. So we ask you to pick a location in your municipality that has some kind of hidden history around racial justice, Native rights, LGBTQ rights, minority rights, and do something creative to lift up that history. Record yourself doing your activity and send us the recording. So this year we have a couple of suggestions and potential ideas for a theme that we can all sort of hone in on for our Teach the Truth. And I just want to mention that the reason it's the 2nd week of October is because that Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day, and October 14th is George Floyd's birthday. So that's why we chose that 2nd week of October to always be Teach the Truth Week. So our ideas for ways that you might frame or a theme that you might build your Teach the Truth activity around. So one thought was, pick a holiday, an American holiday, to research and teach the true history behind the myth of that holiday. For example, Thanksgiving. We're taught sort of a mythological version of Thanksgiving in 5th grade. What's the real history behind Thanksgiving? Pick July 4th, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, President's Day, whatever it is. Or perhaps pick a date that is not currently a holiday that you wish was, like Sojourner Truth's birthday, the anniversary of an important event in history, something like that. So that was one thought that we had for a way for you to frame your Teach the Truth event. Another idea is to lift up Native American history in your area. Who are the tribes that are native to your area, and what is the history of that tribe, and where are they today? If folks have other ideas in the last couple of minutes before we close out tonight that you want to put in the chat or that you want to email to any of us, we invite you to put those ideas out. And we're going to be sending out information in the next month or so about our 3rd annual Teach the Truth. So I just want to invite you all to do that and put your ideas in the chat if you have any, or send them out to us by email. And we're going to close out tonight with our closing prayer. And I've asked my friend Bianca Tomasini if she would share a closing prayer or thought or reflection with us. Bianca is an amazing advocate for immigrant rights and immigrant justice, and co-leads the Advocacy Committee for the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. So Bianca, if you would unmute yourself.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Bonnie. I appreciate the opportunity. I've not done this, but thank you so much for being as you are, and all the wonderful work that you are always doing. I will aim for a prayer. We are grateful, dear Lord, to this community and its leaders coming together, opening our eyes, minds, and hearts, ready to receive your guidance and inspiration to take action, knowing that we are all connected and here to take care of each other. Most importantly, of our siblings in need of healing, restoration, and justice. May we act loudly and persistently in solidarity and towards justice and peace. Amen.
Thank you, Bianca. That was beautiful. Thank you